Hi, I'm Paula Renova, founder of Renova Enterprises and creator of the Cardinal Method of Life Connection. And today I'm going to talk about the ego and two specific types of ego trips that one is more explicit and more obvious. It tends to be very easy to detect. And the other one is disguised as altruism, but it's also a trap. It's also a manipulation of the ego. Now, the first thing we need to talk about in a cardinal method perspective, for those of you who are familiar with the books, the inner child strategies are different from the ego strategies. So the inner child is basically very needy and very impatient for results. And the ego, on the other hand, is more controlling. So the inner child wants to be taken care of and avoids responsibility for self. And the ego, on the other hand, wants to be in control of things and has this omnipotent energy behind it. And what are the specific strategies that I tend to see in ego trips? So how do you detect your ego at work when it's not serving your real self or your higher self? Because the problem is that inner child mode and ego mode are not truth mode, are not real self mode. They deviate us from our tracks. So back to the ego, what are the two strategies? Either we're very egotistical, we're very self-centered, and we only think about ourselves and cannot see others. So that's a more explicit strategy that we tend to associate with the ego. And often I see even spiritual people saying that we should eliminate the ego. And I don't think that is exactly what we need to do in a human experience, because the ego serves a purpose. A strong, healthy ego is really our adult selves at work. And we can't really abandon that and be just spiritual. And it's not even about neutralizing the ego either. It's just about knowing the place and the size of the ego, what purpose it serves, and that it is really supposed to be in the back burner, protecting us so that we know the dangers of the world and we take responsibility for self, and also to serve a higher purpose when you have a spiritual consciousness and when you engage in higher consciousness. So the one that should always be in charge is the higher self, and the real self merging with the higher self. So the ego can either be very egotistical, very self-centered, and not see others, so you love yourself more than you love others always. We should take care of ourselves first, and then we take care of our interpersonal relationships, our families and friends and closest people to us, and then we go out in the world and create good things for humanity in a social environment in our community. It should be those three steps in that sequence, in that order. If we're just self-centered, we're not really evolving. We can't have healthy interpersonal relationships or serve humanity or serve our community as we all should. But the other strategy of the ego that is very disguised as service, is something that people rarely associate with the ego, but it's the ego regardless. It's when we put others before ourselves, is when we violate our own well-being for the sake of other people and see it as sacrifice and see that as a spiritual sacrifice or whatever. That is an ego trip as well, because the ego wants to have control and wants to have a good image. An image is not necessarily the truth. So if you are putting others before yourself, that's also an ego trip, even if it's disguised as service and spirituality. So spirituality is about knowing who you are, owning your truth, being good to yourself, loving yourself, so that you can have healthy interpersonal relationships with your family. And that's where family constellation work is done in the Cardinal Method perspective. And then you serve society, humanity, and your community. If you're doing just the third step and forgetting about yourself and having problems in your interpersonal relationships, that's an ego trip. And I know it's manipulative, and I know it's very concealed as unconditional love. So this is what I wanted to share with you today. I know it's a little complex. We even have an ego workshop coming up, a Cardinal Method workshop on Saturday the 17th. And I hope you can join us. We still have a few spots left. It's very limited seating. Some seats are taken already. But if you're interested, we'll be here on the 17th for that specific workshop. And I hope to see you soon. I'm very grateful for everyone who's been watching the videos, reading the books, and giving me feedback. And I hope to be connected with you always. Thank you again. Bye-bye.